Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. We're going to be talking about the new moon, which has actually already taken place. So the advantage is we have the energy of that new moon to enliven this discussion as we talk about what the next 30 days might be like, considering this Gemini lunation that we had just this morning. So let's go to the chart so we can be talking about the chart while we're looking at it. And you should be able to see the chart now. And of course, we're using the chart that has Aries on the ascendant and equal houses or whole sign houses. And we're also looking at the new moon itself, which is in the Gemini, middle part of the Gemini, the sign of Gemini. And you know, the thing that strikes me about this configuration, because I remember a month ago talking about the new moon configuration when the new moon was right here in the middle of Taurus, and it's really very similar in certain ways. I mean, Saturn and Pluto are still kind of dominating the landscape up here, and then other things are moving quite slowly. You know, Neptune is still in pretty much the same place. It's slowing down. It's going to turn retrograde later on this month, and it's not going to be such an amazing thing that it's moving backwards instead of forward, because it is an outer planet. They are far away. They move very slowly in any case. And I don't believe the retrogrades of outer planets are that significant compared to their direct motion. However, the fact that it is stationing and standing still does make a difference, because it makes it that much more prominent. The slower they move, the more prominent they are, because they just last for a long time. If somebody has something in the middle of one of the mutable signs, Pisces or Sag or Virgo or Gemini, they will be they will be noticing this Neptune presence right there on your, whatever it might be, on either square or opposite or conjunct to your degree. And it's a significant presence this month because it is moving so slow, and because it is about to stand still right in the sky. I forget exactly. Let me look. The time passages software, you can tell when it's going to retrograde by a right click. So when I do right click, it's June 21st at 1843, which is where it is now. So basically, oh no, it's 38 now. It's going to move a little bit, 5 more minutes of a degree, and then it will stop and then move backwards. So this whole month it's going to be sitting right here at this, 18 degree and 3/4 mark of Pisces. And that is kind of significant because it's also where Saturn is headed. Saturn is backing, having already turned retrograde, is backing away from the 19 degree and a half mark further back towards 18. So basically these guys are in a forming sextile to each other, 60 degree mark. So it's not that, it's probably would be more significant if they were square, but it's still a significant factor that we have a very strong presence of Neptune right now. As we did last month, we have a strong presence of Uranus as well. Maybe not quite as strong as it was last month, but it's still in pretty close connection to Chiron, one sign away, semi-sextile. It's still connected to one of these new planets, Makemake, which I have shown in the chart right now. These 3 planets of Eris and Haumea and Makemake are pretty important planets, even though they're considered less prominent than the regular outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that we've been working with so many years. These new ones, by George, they do pack a punch. I've been trying to demonstrate that the very newest ones, Haumea and Makemake, have to do with earth issues and have to do with profound connection with nature. And I've been investigating them, and they're pretty interesting. You can't miss finding their presence in the charts of people like Wordsworth, who extolled nature, John Muir, who was a terrific environmentalist, very prominent, obviously, environmentalist in the late 19th century. And Eris has been shown to be powerful. Most people, most astrologers recognize that Eris is quite powerful in charts. It's the twin of Pluto. It's the same size, same astronomical designation of dwarf planet, same location in the Kuiper belt. So basically these are planets, just like Pluto is still considered a planet for astrology, no question about that. And I believe these 3 new ones are also important in charts, and I've been able to demonstrate that. So it's kind of interesting to see these coming along. But before we get into something as esoteric as these brand new planets, let's talk a little bit about this configuration, which is very similar, as I say, to last month. We still have this prominent Saturn-Pluto conjunction. It's only a few degrees away. They're also parallel. If you check, you can right-click on each one and you see 21.9. You see an indication right here that Pluto is parallel to Saturn. Amongst other things, it's parallel to Jupiter as well, and it's contraparallel to the Sun, which brings the prominence even greater. This is minus 21.9. Let's see what the Sun is. The Sun is 22.3, so it's about half a degree of celestial declination, which is in corresponding to the celestial equator. And so we know that because they're on different sides but the same degree, pretty much, that they are in connection to each other, it's kind of a minor conjunction. And so the Sun, being part of this new moon, definitely brings out the Pluto. So we have a transformational time, as I've been saying, every single new moon. Gosh, this is a very transformational time, but it is it not? I mean, we know that in the zeitgeist, things are definitely upside down, moving in all different directions. We don't understand exactly where the culture is going, but we have several clues that it's in a rather weird place. And we see both the progressive resurgence in the face of the conservative victory of 2016, and we see the conservatives really kind of battening down the hatches and trying to resist change and trying to resist working on climate change, for example. They don't think that's worth doing. They'd rather make some money on selling fossil fuels, or at least they're willing to respond to the fossil fuel lobby, which is enormous, which of course they've spent, I believe it's $2 billion supporting the idea that global warming isn't that important, which outspends the environmental movement by a factor of 10. So they're really working on this idea that we don't want to start limiting fossil fuel sales because that would change the whole profit structure of the fossil fuel industry, and not only that, it would change the energy structure of the entire world society. So there'd have to be cutbacks. There'd have to be ways to use less energy, conservation in the sense of environmental conservation. And this is a difficult thing to accept. So we're really heading into a very transformational period of time with this spring of 2019, then the end of the year of 2019, January of 2020, and then the end of the year 2020, when in mid-November there's this gigantic triple conjunction of Jupiter with Saturn and Pluto just before Saturn and Jupiter together enter into the sign of Aquarius to conjoin there at 0 degrees Aquarius, which is a fascinating thing as well, because that's when Jupiter and Saturn come together every 20 years. It's the first time in air signs. There's been a series in earth signs. So, you know, we see just these enormous changes reflected in the way the planets are moving. And I believe we're looking at massive societal change as required by climate change considerations. You know, if we don't want the sea levels to rise enormously, which would be very devastating, and if we don't want to see the weather patterns also getting more abrupt and violent, as we've been seeing, we have to start to put a damper on it, and it's going to be difficult to do that because the society really is addicted to oil. It craves energy, and energy comes through oil right now, or fossil fuels, we say, because it could be coal, it could be natural gas for that matter. So anyway, these are massive changes. We can see that reflected in the society. Guess what that means for individuals? There's definitely going to be changes coming down. And in addition to the changes that are coming down as a result of the way the society is being shoveled into a new configuration, we also have individual change from increasing awareness. And that you can see most easily if you look back. So if we look back in time to the 1950s, we can see that, to me, it's really clear the psychological awareness of each succeeding generation has been vastly more further along than it was in those kind of deadening times of the 50s, when the Beat generation also protested, and when everything was gray flannel suit and hypocrisy, you know, basically. So we've come a long way, and we have a long way still to go, as we can see from the various social manifestations, mass shootings and so on. Everything points to a kind of increasing boil of the cauldron of society as things are shifting. So this is what I've been saying all along. We talked about it last time. This new moon is different in the fact that we have also Venus now as a great part of this, because the real configuration that I see includes these new planets, actually, because Haumea is a powerful presence. I'm still not too sure of how to characterize it, except to say the word nature in caps, and just to say that there's a way that nature provides a spiritual path that strong Haumea indicates is very present in the personality. You see it in people that have a great deal of charisma as well, which I think comes from sort of a natural vitality, connection to source. Is opposite at 24 degrees of Libra, is opposite to Eris at 24 degrees of Aries, and the whole thing is a T-squared of this strong presence of Pluto. So we know that this is rather intense times, and then to see Venus at 23 degrees of Taurus, very close trine to Pluto, semi-sextile it would be to Eris, and connected as well by an inconjunct to this new planet, Haumea. So we're seeing that Venus is plunged right into the middle of this, and that brings up the idea of relationship. Venus is in its own sign of Taurus, which means it's more prominent in that way. And we can just only imagine that bringing relationship into the picture brings us more closer to understanding a little bit better what's going on with ourselves, what's going on with our partnerships that we have, whether it's personal connections, friendships, or business connections, business partnerships, or of course primary partnership, our love relations. Those things are all subject to this kind of transformational intensity that's going on right now, with Pluto being the exemplar of that, Pluto being quite strong in this configuration. And Neptune is powerful as well. Neptune is making an aspect to both Saturn and to Jupiter now. Jupiter moving back towards the 19-degree mark. Saturn moving back through the 19-degree mark towards the 18-degree mark. And Neptune just sitting there at 18 degrees and 3/4 and not moving. So the fact that we have Neptune powerful is positive in a way. There's a way out. There's an understanding that we have a spiritual way out, that if we look at the thing right, we don't have to be afraid of anything because we are spirits in the material world. We are not as simple as just going through life bumbling along in our materialistic ways, and that's all there is to it. No, we have something beyond ourselves, something beyond our ego selves that includes our soul. And so, and Pluto, of course, speaks to that as well. So we understand from the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that, and on these new ones as well, I believe, Haumea and Makemake and Eris, that there is more to life than the simple physical world that we can see, feel, and taste. There is a beyond that we can tune into with our third eye, with our soul presence. And if we tune into that, we're relatively bulletproof, and if we tune into our deepest values, we can come along to a position of power because we just articulate what's inside of ourselves, and you don't have to fear of anything else. You can say, I've done my best. I've said and I've done according to my principles. And at least in that regard, I am free and I am powerful and able to act because I am acting from what deeply motivates me. And that's all that really matters. So I think that, and Eris is the message of that. Eris being a feminine warrior energy for deep soul intention. So this is very important right now, the archetype, and you can see it in paradigm shifters, you can see it in feminists. I don't want to harp on these new planets so much because all the planets are so important in this configuration. But if we think about Venus, and Venus actually represents as well, in the more higher octave of Venus, represents this cosmic love principle, which is also represented by Neptune. And it's a way to resolve polarities. It's a way to resolve dualism. You get to a non-dual point of view, which is that we are just here. We're all just here. We are all part of the same thing. We are all part of an entity that the society, all the entire Earth, all creatures, and we as well, all humans, are all part of this natural, you could say, the soul of the world. And when we recognize that, the polarities drop away, and we don't have to fight or conflict with anybody. We can just be in our own place, and we can revel in the diversity that we see around us, and we can join with it rather than trying to defend ourselves as little isolated island egos. So that's the goal. That's the higher goal, and everybody's at various places along that path. But this is a month, I believe, this month of May, with this Gemini new moon that's just initiating the 30-day cycle here. It is a time to tune in to the higher purpose of everything. It is a time to try to forgive and forget, move beyond old grievances, come to a better understanding of the resolution of polarities rather than emphasizing polarities. Tribalism separates, but this kind of philosophy unifies, and it does involve what you might call God, depending on how you see things. You might call it the universe. You might call it cosmic law. You might call it higher law. But anyway, there is a morality. There is a way of looking at things that corresponds to taking a stand for the higher power of everything, the higher presence, rather than looking at things from a narrow point of view, from an egoic point of view. And there are a lot of things in the society that are bringing us toward that, as well as trying to separate us and pull us apart. So we have both of those going on. As we can see from the planets, from this Uranus and Pluto in combination, which means to move along to come to the next evolutionary point of society. And I want to look at a couple of other charts as well today, because I've been playing with the idea of showing an example chart or two. And so to show you another environmentalist, last month ago we looked at the chart of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been proposing a Green New Deal, and we showed that actually she does have by chance, by good coincidence, as we checked, she does have a strong presence of these two new planets of Haumea and Makemake. Well, Paul Hawken is a terrific environmentalist. He's a very spiritual guy. And he was at Wisdom 2.0, and I was very fascinated by his talk. Here's his chart. And he's a very gentle man. And just made me pull up the chart, right, just to see he's such an environmentalist. He's been an environmentalist all his life, and a spiritual presence. And he wrote, and a consultant for corporations for that matter. And he wrote a thing called Drawdown, which is a book just recently published, 100 Solutions to Climate Change. 100 ways that we, with existing technology, with no question about something far out there, that it can make a difference. And then he details, he and a team of people that he got together to do this, detail in these 100 different ways exactly how much carbon output would be reduced, the idea being to get to a zero balance at some point in time, 2030 or whatever, because it can't wait too much longer if we were going to try to save the sea levels from rising completely uncontrollably, as I understand it. So you'd think that there would be a strong presence in his chart, and that's why I pull it up his chart initially sometime back to explore that, because like I say, I keep expecting to find these nature planets in the charts of people that are passionate environmentalists such as he, and we see that there's a partile opposition in his chart between his Mercury in Aquarius and, this is a sunrise chart, by the way, so we're basing it on his Aquarius sun, so we don't know what his exact rising is, we don't know his birth time. But approximately, at least his Mercury is right around here. 17 degrees of Aquarius is right opposite to 17 degrees of Leo. That's the position of Haumea. And as it turns out, in this particular chart, in almost the 50s, they were about 30 degrees apart at that time. So the presence of Makemake is also quite clear with the Mercury because that's at 16 degrees. So you can see that both of these planets are connected to his Mercury, which is writing, and he's been doing that. Not only that, the Mercury and the Sun are quite close together, and Saturn is at 19 degrees, making an inconjunct to his Sun, a partile inconjunct to his Sun, and is therefore connected by conjunction to his Maki-Maki, and Mars is at 15. So his Maki-Maki is right in the middle of his Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is the determination to do things. To have that Saturn-Mars is, I'm going to do things, and I'm going to do them doggedly and steadfastly and continually, and I'm not going to give up. And he's got Maki-Maki right in the middle there, and he's got, as I've been saying, a pretty prominent presence too of Haumea opposite his Mercury. So I just want to show you these things that I'm not just flapping my jaws about these new planets. They really are connected to environmentalism, to having a profound connection with nature, to having a charismatic presence and a sense of purpose, a sense of morality, a sense of spiritual oneness, a sense of nature's spiritual path. So that's one thing. And then another thing I wanted to show you, though, is that this new moon, how does it affect the USA chart? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but it is true that the 12-degree mark and a half of Gemini is right on the descendant of the US chart. This is the chart I used was rectified by Dane Rudjar and was proven by the 9/11 opposition of Pluto and Saturn, which was right across this ascendant-descendant. So I think that proves it out pretty well, because obviously it was a big change point for this country. Powerful time. And we have 12 and 12 and a half, and the US sun degree is actually 13. So that's 30 degrees away, semi. And we have Mars coming up on the US sun at the time of this new moon. And we have Maki-Maki at the apex of the chart, at the midpoint, at the, the midheaven, the middle of the heavens, at the MC. So I think it's a powerful time for these Earth issues to be articulated in America. And we also might note the fact that at 24 degrees of Cancer, we find the Mercury in the US chart, which is all about communications within the United States media, reportage, and all that. And that is the T-squared to these two, to Eris at 24 degrees, Haumea at 24 degrees of Libra, so T-squared to the U.S. Mercury at 24 Cancer. So, and then the Jupiter right on the ascendant of the U.S. chart as well. So, powerful times. And of course, you know that I think everybody talks about that as the Pluto in Capricorn is coming further and further. Now, this is even beyond 2020. It will eventually reach the 27-degree mark, which is the point where you have your Pluto return, which isn't true for an individual, but it is true for a country. It's about 248 years, so that's how long it's been since 1776, when the country was really founded. So that's important to recognize as well, that Pluto return is coming up for the United States. There's a new a transformation that's happening within this country that's creating a very different country than it ever has been. And we can see the beginning of that now, and we hope we can see a more positive turn to that as time goes on. So it's a pretty powerful time. Not only is Mercury very emphasized in this current configuration with Eris and Haumea opposition, but also the Mercury transiting-wise in this new moon, which is the chart for the rest of the month, is at 27 degrees, and that's where the moon is in the US chart, so that is an inconjunct there. Trine between transiting Mercury and the moon at 27 degrees of Aquarius in the US chart, which is, again, that represents the population, and Mercury represents the media. So there's a lot of media going on. There's a lot of publication of new possibilities for the presidency in 2020, and that's a huge conversation. And part of that is the Green New Deal, which they're talking about, or one presidential candidate is running on the environment issue and saying that's the only issue is climate change, and that's Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State. So, I mean, this is all, it's nascent now, it's becoming more and more clear, but we're going to see more of this. I predict that we're going to see a lot more environmental concern coming up in this country. As time goes by, it's going to become more and more a dominant theme in the headlines than it even is right now. So that's something we can see if that comes out that way. So going back to the chart itself, I don't know if we have any questions. Do we have any questions? No. We kind of surprised everybody with this. We didn't pre-announce, but we're doing this discussion, and then we're going to be able to also put it into our newsletter, so it will be recorded and published. And I think that's mostly what I wanted to say about this chart. We do want to be aware of the fact that Mars, just as we're talking about Venus being part of this new moon configuration, Mars is very much part of the full moon configuration that comes up later in the month, because at that point it will move to 19 degrees of Cancer, and it'll be opposite Saturn. So that's going to be a powerful presence of Mars at that point. So we do have personal issues coming into play in this month, and we will be able to see both societal transformation and our own individual transformation as we get involved more and more in what we're up to, as we're open as we can be to change and to understanding that life has changed, that we can't stay stuck in the same set of habit patterns forever. We have to move on. We have to be able to see what needs to be let go of, how we need to, which is a tough topic, right? How we need to be able to evolve in order to be the best version of ourselves that we can muster. So let's go back, switch the view. And in closing, I just want to say that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Cliche. This is a very strange time, a very strong time, and a time that we have to stand up. That we have to stand up and be counted if we're going to try to move the needle in the direction of positive change, in the direction of eliminating carbon from the atmosphere instead of increasing the carbon in the atmosphere. I think that's very clear. There's people that seem to feel that you can ignore the science, that there may be people that doubt the science, but the science is really clear. And if you are actually going to take a poll, and find out what the facts are, and what does this scientist say, what does that scientist say, what does the next one say, you do find that the great majority, except for maybe a few kind of quirky people amongst the scientific establishment, are very clear that carbon in the atmosphere is causing more and more devastating changes in the climate. And so the trick would be to keep the carbon out of the atmosphere, to try to slow down our production of it, maybe find ways to remove it. If you're interested in this issue, consult the book Drawdown, which does, as I say, outline 100 possible ways to start making a difference. And we need to militate for that with our leaders. I don't think we're going to go very far without the leadership of all countries in the world, including especially this one, which is so vast and so powerful, coming down on the side of climate change, on the side of doing something about climate change. So that's my major message at this time. I'm beginning to realize, I really believe that that's the issue of our times, and that we really should be articulating that. And I'm starting to kind of make that a part of the message that I'm trying to get across with these talks and other ways. So thanks for listening, and see you next time. Have a good couple of weeks. Bye now.